In this video, we're going to discuss joint cost allocation. And so what joint cost allocation is exactly what the title says. It's the allocation of joint costs. And I don't know that that tells you any more than you knew before, but let's get a little bit further into that definition. So when a company makes several different products and they all start with the same base product, then they incur joint costs. So, for example, in the problem that we're looking at, we have a company that has products that are based on crude oil. And they take crude oil and they process it so far, and that forms the basis of all of the products that they're going to make. And then they take each of those products from the common point and split them off and do different things to them to turn them into final products. Well, the processing of the initial product to the place where everything stops and then splits off to become its own individual product, you'll incur joint cost to make that one base product that all of those things share in common. And in order to appropriately assign costs to each of the finished product that you make, you need to know how to allocate those joint costs to each product so that you can allocate those costs correctly when you're calculating the final price of the end products. So joint cost allocation is taking the cost associated with those products and splitting them up amongst the products. Now, there are actually several different ways to do this, but there are three main methods, and that's what we're going to go over in this video. The physical quantity method, the sales value at split off method, and the net realizable value method. So let's talk a little bit about each of these methods, and then we'll see how to calculate them. For the physical quantity method, we actually take the physical quantity used by each of the product lines and split the costs up that way. So for example, we're going to have this one common set of data that we're going to use for each of our three calculation methods. And in this problem, we have 1,000 barrels of crude oil, and those are going to be processed using the same method up to the split off point. And so when we make our different products, we're going to use 300 barrels that eventually turn into asphalt, 300 barrels that eventually turn into fuel oil, 2,000 that eventually turn into diesel fuel, 100 that turn into kerosene, and another 100 that turn into gasoline. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the costs associated with those barrels of oil and split them off based on the ratio of barrels used for the particular product to the total number of barrels used. One other thing that you need to know about this method before we go into an Excel spreadsheet and calculate it is that spoilage is never considered. And this particular problem doesn't mention spoilage, so we wouldn't have to worry about it. But if you receive a problem that has spoilage on it, you will ignore it for the purpose of calculating the physical quantity method. Also, you will not consider any costs incurred after the split-off point, where the units are no longer involved in a common process. So let's go over to Excel, and we'll calculate the allocation of the costs using the physical quantity method. Okay, so I'm going to make a list of all of the different types of things we have. And because this is the physical quantity method, I'm going to also make a list of the physical quantity that we used for each product line. Okay, then I want to figure out how many barrels we used in total, so we're going to add all of those together. And we have 1,000. Then we're going to figure out what percentage each line represents out of the total. And so we take the number of barrels and divide it by the total. I'm going to put dollar signs in here because what that does is it keeps that total fixed on the bottom, and I can just take it and drag it and turn those into a percentage. And those are pretty even percentages, so I'm going to take that 100th of a percent out of there. Okay. And then I'm just going to take that percent and multiply it by my total joint cost. And the joint cost would be the cost of all of the barrels of oil. And that allocates the common cost to my barrels of oil. So 30% times 100,000, and I just drag that formula down. It allocates it out here. And then if I want to make sure that I have captured all of my costs and I haven't done something wrong, I'm going to add all of these together, and I should have $100,000 at the end, because that was the total I was trying to allocate out. Looks like my bad typing has struck again. All right, so that is the physical quantity method. That one is really easy. Then we're going to go take a look at our next. And then we have the sales value at split-off method. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what we could sell each unit for at the point of split-off. And so if we go back up here, it looks like at the point of split-off, we could have sold each barrel that we had prepared for asphalt for $60, each one that we had prepared for fuel oil at $180, each one for diesel fuel at $160, etc. So to do this calculation, we need to figure out what the total sales value of the line would be at the point of split-off as compared to the total sales value of all products at the point of split-off. So when I say that, let me put some numbers to that. I think it's going to make a little bit more sense. We go back up here, and this chart tells us what our selling price per barrel would be at the split-off point for each item. So for asphalt, it's $60, fuel oil, $180, etc. And here are the number of barrels that we have for each item. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the number of barrels times its value, selling value, at split off to figure out the total for the line. We're going to add together those totals and then figure out what each line represents percentage-wise of that total. And when we do this calculation, we are not going to consider any spoilage or any costs incurred after the split-off point. So I think it's going to make a little bit more sense if we go over here and we do a calculation. Okay. So I'm going to keep these columns, but I'm going to scoot them over because they're going to be useful in a minute, I think. So we said that we need to figure out what the total sales value of each line is at the split-off point. So we know that we have this many barrels, and then we're going to look at the selling price at split-off. And then we'll multiply the price per barrel times the number of barrels. Okay. We'll just call this total value. Okay. Multiply the number of barrels times the selling price at split off. There we go. We'll carry that formula down, and the total is $130,000. Okay, and then I'm going to bring those columns back over here. Make that a little bigger. Okay, so I need to go through and I need to calculate the percent of the total again. But this time I'm going to do it based on total value of the line compared to the total value of all lines. Last time I did it on number of barrels. This time we're using sales value at split off to figure out this percentage. So I will take the total value of the asphalt and divide it by the total value of all product lines. Again, I'm going to put dollar signs in here to keep that bottom number, the denominator, stable when I drag my formula. And this time I don't have nice clean percentages. That's okay. All right, and then I'm going to take that total, multiply it by the joint cost again to get my cost allocated to the appropriate line. And then I'm going to add all of my sums together to see how much I get, right? To make sure that I have a total of $100,000 because all of my allocated costs should come out to the total that I was trying to allocate. Okay, and that's how you allocate using the sale value at split off. Again, my bad typing strikes again. All right, then we have a third method that we need to go over. And that method is the net realizable value method. And this one is a little bit more complex because it's going to allocate common costs based on the total sales value of each line at the final sales value. And then it's going to take that and divide it by the total of all of the final sales values. And so when we say the final sales value, we're not talking about the point of split off anymore where the items stop being common. We're talking about after the products are fully processed and after the asphalt has been turned into asphalt, after the fuel oil has been turned into fuel oil, right? After everything has been complete, you're going to look at the sales value of each of the items and compare them one against the other. And when you're doing this, you will consider some items that you did not consider in the other two methods. You will be considering items that happen after split off, including any spoilage, so you may have to take some units out, and you're going to consider any additional costs incurred to further process the items. So we're going to take a look at this on Excel, and I'm going to copy and paste again. And so this is going to look a little bit different. Okay. And so I'm going to use the prior process that we had, but I'm going to scoot these columns over here. They're going to become valuable again here in a second. All right. So this time we're doing net realizable value, which means we're going to take the number of barrels and multiply it by the selling price per barrel after the additional processes have happened at the very end of the product once it's finished. So now it's no longer the selling price at split off, it's the selling price at final value. And so that's 70 for the asphalt, 200 for fuel oil, 180, 90, 190. Okay? And I've already got this calculation in place, the total value. That's going to take the number of barrels and multiply it by the final selling price per barrel. Okay, But we aren't done yet finding that net realizable value, because this is the total of what I could sell it for. However, there were some additional costs incurred by the company to further process these items. And those are listed here, and they're called separable costs. Different problems may list them in different ways, but the problem from your notes lists them as separable costs, so that's what we're going to call them. And those are going to be subtracted out, because this is the total sales value, but you have to subtract out the expenses that you incurred to get to your net realizable value before you're subtracting out the cost of the actual barrels, the joint costs. So the separable costs are 1,000 each. Actually, I'm just going to list those as positives because it looks a little neater. Until we get down here to the kerosene and the gasoline, those are 2,000 each. Okay, and so we'll get to the net costs before considering joint costs. $21 minus 1,000, and we'll get that net for each of those lines. And these are the values that we will use to allocate the joint costs. So we're going to sum those up. And we're going to use the individual number as our numerator, and we'll use the total number as our denominator. So now I can bring this calculation back over here and figure out my percent of the total. This time it's the net cost before considering joint cost divided by the total from that group. And again, I'm going to put my dollar signs in to hold that number steady and just drag my formula down. And I take that percentage and I multiply it by my joint cost to get to the cost allocated. And again, the same final step, add all of my allocated costs to make sure that I'm getting to 100,000, which is what I was allocating out over here. So those are the three main methods of allocating joint costs. There will be another video going over a sim showing that and how it works practically.